Zahra, thanks so much for joining me here at Bonbon's Nook. Been
Thanks.
looking forward to having you on the podcast for a little while, and finally we're able to make it happen.
Oh, it's really fun to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So I wanted to start by asking you, how did you get involved with taking people to Egypt on these epic tours that it sounds like you do with people?
Yeah, wow. They are epic. Well, the first time I went to Egypt was in 2012 with a lady named Nikki Scully. And she first started going to Egypt. Well, the very first time she went to Egypt was with the Grateful Dead in 1970. Oh God, the Deadheads who hear this are going to curse me. It was 78 or 79 when
I can't remember the exact year
right
either.
when it was the Grateful Dead show at the pyramids.
Yeah.
And Nikki was with the road manager, Rock Scully, of the Grateful Dead.
Got
hence
it.
Nikki Scully,
The name,
Rock Scully,
yeah.
yes. And she went with them to Egypt and for this concert and fell in love with Egypt, right? Like, wow, Egypt is a wow. And so then she went back after and began leading tours to Egypt in the 80s and led many, 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 many tours over the years, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. And I began studying with her in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. And in 2011, my mom passed away. And that was a thing, right? This rite of passage that we go through when we lose a parent. And so that was in October of 2011. And she had a tour going in 2012. And she's like, whoops, why don't you come with me? Help me out, assist me, right? Because I'd already been working with her. I knew how she worked and what she needed and all that. So I'm like, okay, I'm going. And so I went with her, and she was co-leading that particular trip with an artist named Alex Gray and his wife, Allison.
Oh, how cool.
And their art is crazy cool, both of them. And so that was my introduction to Egypt, was Nikki Scully and Alex and Allison Gray, and a fabulous group of people. And so Egypt opened my heart, right? In a way, like after 2 years of a cancer process with my mom and all the grief that holds. I mean, death is hard no matter what, whether it's sudden or over time. And this was one of those over time things. I'm in Egypt and I'm in one of the temples, and all of a sudden I'm laughing and laughing and laughing. And I hadn't laughed like that in years. And so it was like this beautiful gift that I could be in grief and have joy at the same time, right? And so Egypt did things like that to me, where it opened me up in ways that I could have not ever have guessed, right? So then I went back again the following year, assisting her new artist named Martina Hoffman, who's also a fabulous visionary artist, very different stylistically from the Grays, but very similar in that kind of visionary quality that they carry. And then I went again, leading my first trip with Nikki. And then I went again, assisting her and another teacher named Normandy Ellis. And then at that point, it became clear that Nikki was going to retire from doing the tours, right? She was eldering, and it was just time. But she didn't want to close the business, so I kept managing her tours, running them, leading them, until the end of 2018. And then I opened my own company and started doing my own tours under my own company, with her blessings, and have been doing that ever since, right? Well, and then COVID came. There was that. Actually, I was in Egypt, and it was March of 2020, right? That fateful month. And I had 2 tours back to back. I had about 45 people altogether coming between the 2 tours. And I'm in Cairo. All my luggage is in Luxor. I'm in Cairo to just like figure things out, like what's happening. People are about to fly, like literally fly to the country. And I realize I've got to cancel this trip, right? Like, I don't know what's going on. Like, it seems like the world's going crazy out there. And so we make the call to cancel the trip, like moments before people are ready to leave to get on the flight to come to Cairo, right?
Wow, yeah.
I mean, the second tour had a little more time to cancel their stuff, but the first tour, they were like, it was days. And then I got the word that the airports in Egypt were closing in 24 hours, and I had to get out of the. I either had to like settle in and be in Egypt for some period of time, or I needed to jump out of the country. And so I jumped with my carry-on, left all my other luggage in Luxor.
Wow, what an adventure.
And came home.
It's like the doors closing.
Yeah, it was eerie coming back through the airport system in that moment when every country was like doors and gates and whatnot's shutting down, right? And it was trippy.
Wow.
So yeah, anyway. And then so that COVID, no trips during that time, but then since then I've done 2 tours last year and 1 this year. Just got back a little bit ago.
What was it like doing the first year back last year?
I was a little nervous, not nervous, and I don't know what I was nervous about. I think like, oh, it's been a few years. Have I forgotten? Do I know what I'm doing? Right?
Yeah, totally.
But it was just Egypt. Like I got there and I'm like, oh yeah, I know what
exactly
I'm doing.
What to do.
Yeah, here I am. This is Egypt. This is
Beautiful.
Me in Egypt. This is the Egyptian people. This is the Egyptian mysteries. This is why I do what I do, and let's go. So yeah.
What's the name of your tour business for that?
So on this side of things, it's called Sacred Witness Pilgrimages.
Okay.
And in Egypt, we call it Mysteries of Egypt.
Okay.
Because that's really what we're doing, is we're bringing people through the mysteries of Egypt. It's pretty fabulous.
Cool. What's the website for people to go to if they're interested in?
Sacredwitness.com.
Sacredwitness.com. Great.
Sacredwitness.com. Yeah.
Nice.
And what I love is, we're not just going to Egypt and being like, oh, look, there's a thing, click, click with the camera, though there's a lot of clicking with the cameras for sure. But my goal is to, how do I say this in a way that makes sense? Well, so in the Egyptian mythos, right, of thousands of years of time and many, many Egyptian deities, many, there was like over 2,000, particular stories emerged that really represented the archetypal essence of nature and the human, both, right? And so you see these deities that are like an animal head and a human body, right? And it's what that's representing, what I believe it represents, is this recognition that humanity and all the rest of the world are all part of the same whole, right? We're all part of nature. We are nature. The animals are nature. And that they viewed the divinity in all things around them. And so they see the fierce lioness protecting her cubs, right? And they see divinity in that, and it becomes Sekhmet, the goddess Sekhmet, right? And so each of these deities have these archetypal essences, like the mother, the teacher, the creator, the weaver, the all these archetypes. So how do we, as people right now, as humans in our life, how do we use these archetypes to be better people, right? To be more self-actualized and more able to fully arrive into our lives and make choices from that place, right? Rather than a reactionary place of, oh, things are hard, whatever, trauma, and trauma's real. No, like, I don't want to discount trauma, but when we can arrive into like, oh, here I am now, right here. What's here? How do I meet this here? And working with these Egyptian deities from so long ago help us arrive here in a way that's really quite profound. and being in their temples and in the land where they were birthed from is really fascinating. Okay, this is a funny thing. I think it's funny anyway. Okay, so the ancient deities were called the Neteru. Neteru was the name for them. One was Neter, and many were Neteru. And so that word, if you hear the word Neteru or you see the hieroglyph for Neteru, you know it's talking about the deities of Egypt, the gods and goddesses of Egypt. And so the Neteru represented, as I just said, all these natural elements of the natural world in which Egypt thrived, right? And so here we are, all these people in the world who aren't living in Egypt, who are now connecting in with this ancient way of looking at the world, and connecting in with that nature from the Egyptian valley. And I keep thinking about, well, who are the Neteru in our neighborhood, like in the Pacific Northwest? Like, who are the neighborhood? And when I was a kid, there was a song, I think it was Sesame Street. My God. And it was, who are the people in your neighborhood?
Oh, I remember that one.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I've been thinking, who are the Netter in my neighborhood? So who are like when I see there's been a crow who's been really paying attention to me lately. I'm like, I see you seeing me, right? So I put some food out for him. So that's like a Netter. That's an incarnation of something spiritual, let's say, right? Something magical, something special that's in the form of a crow. So just like they had an ibis who represented Thoth, who was the god of wisdom, right? Because they saw the ibis in the river, in the papyrus reeds, and they equated him to wisdom. And so he was the Netter in their neighborhood. And so, yeah, who are the Netter in the Pacific Northwest?
Yeah, interesting question to ask.
Right?
What are some of the things that you do when you take people on these tours that are unique to your tour?
Well, we have private visits at certain places, like the Sphinx, for example. When the plateau opens at, I think, 7 a.m. and closes at, say, 4 p.m. or 4 or 5, somewhere in there, the Sphinx is in a fenced-in enclosure, and nobody can go in there. So the only way to go in there is before or after public hours with private permission. And so we do that at a few of the sites because there's just something really special about greeting the sun from between the Sphinx's paws, right? Standing there,
yeah.
These paws that are like higher above your head, and it's like being hugged by this giant beast.
Wow.
Super cool. On the spring equinox is a really wonderful time to be there because it's at that moment that the sun rises directly between the paws, right? And at other times of the year, it's, a little one way or the other, but on the equinox, it's directly between the paws. And I always so we were talking about the alchemy or the archetypes, right? And I always think of the Sphinx as the patient one because it's been there for so long. Oh my goodness. Conservatively, some many thousands of years, controversially, we're maybe 30,000 years. It's been there for so long. And it sits there and it waits for the sun to rise every day, right? This patience. And then it comes, right? The sun rises and it's looking and it sees it. And then it rises and it's above its head. And it has to wait all day to rise again. Let's go with the controversial number of 30,000 years. I mean, how many sunrises is that?
Wow.
That's so many sunrises. That's so much patience.
Yeah.
I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah, it's just stone, right? But
right.
At the same time, it represents something more than just stone. So anyway, yeah.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the food like in Egypt? I've never been there. I don't really have any frame of reference for what the food would be like. And do you have a specific food element that
right.
you take people through?
Well, especially in the Western world, there's a whole lot of different preferences and particularities and needs and allergies and this is and that. So first we figure out what everybody's needs are because, everybody has their needs. And then within that, Egypt is very, I'll talk about from a like if you sit down with the family to eat a meal, right? The food goes in the middle of the table and there might be like some chicken that has been cooked in the oven with some tomato sauce over it. And I don't know the names of these dishes. I should by now, but I don't anyway. And then some potatoes that have been sliced and also baked in the oven and maybe some rice and like a cucumber and tomato salad that's been chopped up. Oftentimes there'll be like some olives and spicy peppers and like pickled things, a bowl of pickled things, and tahini and hummus and baba ganoush, those kind of things. Very Mediterranean and always, always, always bread. The round, flat Arabic bread. And not often do we need flat plates. There may be some utensils on the table for things that might need it, but really you just use the bread, right? You take little pieces of bread and then pinch food from the bowls or plates in front of you in the middle of the table.
That's so much more fun than using utensils.
It is. It is, because then you can just, clean your hands afterwards.
Yeah. It's so much more communal feeling too.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really sweet. I mean, we don't eat like that with the tours, but the kind of food is still similar. Mm-hmm. It's very Mediterranean. There's a very popular dish called kosheri that is like street food, sort of. You can get it all over Egypt. And it's basically some rice and some macaroni that have been mixed together. Sometimes it's just pieces of spaghetti that have broken in little pieces. And sometimes it's like little shaped macaroni. Anyway, so that is one thing. And then they have these lentils that are dry. It's not like the soupy lentils, but they're like cooked dry. So then the lentils go on it and go on top of the rice thing. And then there's a tomatoey kind of sauce. It's not like spaghetti sauce and it's not like salsa, but it's almost like, I don't know, the merging of those two somehow. I don't know how to explain it. It's somewhere between the two. And so that goes on it. And then there's these crispy onions where they cook them to the point that they're crunchy, and that goes on top of the whole thing. And so it's like really big carb load, really big protein load with all those lentils. And it's like a very common, just, fuel up kind of food all over Egypt. And there's all kinds of other food, but think Mediterranean food.
Yeah.
And that's the flavors you're going to get.
I'm curious about the wheat they're using, if you happen to know. Are they using the more ancient grain version, like the icorn? I think it's icorn or acorn.
Right.
So I was just finding out about that a little bit and how hasn't been hybridized to produce more of the gluten and the higher carb content. So it's more in balance, the original ancient grain. It
tastes different. The bread tastes different. If that means anything. It could just be the way it was cooked, right? But it tastes different. And I've also noticed that people who claim to have gluten intolerances, not like I've got celiac, I can't touch wheat, not that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
but people are like, I like to avoid wheat because
digestion issues or whatever.
Yeah. They end up eating a little bit of bread because it's, when you're there, it's experience and you're like, okay, try it. Yeah. But it doesn't affect them in the same way.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Egypt has a lot of agriculture, especially in the Delta region, but a lot of the food that's grown in Egypt is actually exported to Europe. So
I didn't know that.
That's a strange thing, I think.
Yeah.
Like they grow a lot of sugar cane. So there's a lot of sugar. And then they'll import sugar for the local population and export the Egyptian sugar. It doesn't quite make sense in my mind, but there may be some higher logic that I just don't understand. But they grow wheat. They do grow wheat, a lot of wheat, but they also import wheat. When everything started going down with Ukraine, that affected them because a lot of wheat came out of Ukraine.
I see.
So, yeah.
How about the music there? Is that a part of your tours? Is there a music element to where you take people to any music performance? Or?
Sometimes, yeah. There's it's a tanura is what it's called. It's a Sufi dervish performance that happens in Cairo in this beautiful old theater. And these guys start turning with the music. There's full musicians there, and they turn for like 30 minutes. They probably could turn for 30 days without stop, right? It's phenomenal.
Wow.
And then the traditional music that goes along with that, and the zikr, the chanting and all of that. So sometimes we do that. It depends on the schedule. And inevitably Egyptian music comes into their ears from just being in the country, right?
Right.
Being in the taxi boat going across the river and having the taxi boat driver, blaring some Arabic kind of music.
Do you have any particular profound stories that people have shared with you that have been on the tour that you can share with us?
Profound stories.
Just profound moment or
right.
Something that affected their life.
Well, I mean, I think I'll speak generally, right? Because I don't want to talk about any one person's personal experience.
Yeah.
But what I recognize is that most people who come to Egypt with me come back transformed. Sometimes this means making big changes in their life, right? Which can be difficult. There's that. But it's not just about making big changes. It's just sometimes about seeing the world in a different way, seeing oneself in a different way, right? It doesn't have to be about major shifts and changes. I'm quitting my job. I'm leaving my partner. Those kind of things, although that can happen. But that can happen anyway, right? It doesn't have to be because you've gone to Egypt for big shifts to happen. So what I see is that it lights something up inside of them. It causes them to, by looking outward to the world, to this ancient world, and seeing this ancient world in the context of modern Egypt, right? And reflecting then also about their own home, right? And who they are and who they want to be, something changes. I just see it over and over again. And I've been there, 19 times now personally, and have had more, dare I call them, miraculous experiences in Egypt than I've had anywhere else, except maybe, no, the fair experiences are more like magic, whereas the Egypt experience really are like miraculous, right? So, but we can talk about Oregon Country Fair later.
Yeah.
But there's, the magic's alive in Egypt, just like we can feel it at the Oregon Country Fair, right? So, yeah, it keeps me going back to both places. But Egypt keeps calling me back and again and again. And do I say it now? No, I'm going to wait.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to wait.
What's your next tour that you have planned?
The next planned tour is next October of 2025, and it's called Becoming the Lotus.
Okay, so they have a theme that you set for each one?
Everyone has a theme. In part, it helps keep it intriguing for me because I'm not just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again.
I think that's an important aspect.
Right.
Yeah.
Because if I'm just regurgitating something, it's not authentic to the moment in the group. So every tour has a theme, and sometimes I'll duplicate the theme. Like I've done a tour called Becoming the Lotus in the past, but it's never the same thing because it's a different group. It's a different year. It's a different me.
Different you. Yeah.
All the things are different.
Wow.
So I always have a overarching intention for what the goal is for the tour. So with Becoming a Lotus, the intention is all about, becoming a lotus, right? And the Egyptian Blue Lotus was a little tiny seed that would need to grow down in the muck of the mud at the bottom of the water. And so it needs the elements, right? There's the muck of the mud, the earth and the water. And then it strives to be something more, right? So that little seed is like wondering, what am I? What am I? And in that striving and that wondering, it cracks open, begins to root and begins to grow up towards the air, towards the sun, towards the sky. And eventually a bloom comes and it opens. And that's a metaphor really of the path of self-realization, right? And in any given thing, self-realization doesn't have to be like, oh, now I am the Buddha, I am fully awakened, it's done. Right. No, because then I have to go do the laundry and deal with the dog shit that was on the rug this morning. So, right. And then those moments, the self-realization and actualization sort of dissipates quite a bit depending on the situation. But, right, we can come into that place again and again and again. And that's what that lotus kind of process is. So that's what we'll do during the tour. And of course, Egyptian Blue Lotus is a thing. And
yeah, let's talk a little bit about that, because I'm more recent to finding out about it. I don't have any experience with it, but I've been hearing a lot about working with Blue Lotus.
Right.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on it.
Well, it's sort of like the hot, new, trendy,
Sure.
trendy, ancient thing, right? Hot, new, ancient. So where do I talk about it from? So, well, the Neteru, the Neter, who was the Blue Lotus, his name was Nefertem. And his archetype, what he represented, was the awakened one, to be awakened, because the lotus, the Blue Lotus, which is actually a blue water lily, I should be able to say out loud the Latin name, but I can't, so I'm not gonna. You can Google Egyptian Blue Lotus and find it. But its bloom, it comes up, and it over the night it's closed, right? And then when the first rays of sun come, the bloom opens, it awakens to the day, right? It awakens to life. And so that's what Nefertem kind of represents, that aspect of all of us that is the awakened one. It was a sacred flower that grew primarily in the places where there were the marshes when the flood of the Nile would come, and it would overtake the land, obviously, because it was a flood. And then the flood would dissipate. It would leave these pockets of water all around. And that's where, in those kind of pools, that's where the Blue Lotus really liked to live. When the dam was dammed by being dammed, I mean, when the river was dammed by being dammed, it doesn't grow along the river anymore because the habitat isn't there, right? Because it doesn't have the flood and the recession of the flood that happens. So
yeah,
the regulation of a river can bring many good things for humanity, but it can bring many difficult things for the rest of life. And the damming of the Nile is no different. It's brought a lot of good things to the Egyptian people, but it's also brought a lot of challenges to the land. So the Blue Lotus was also used ceremonially. You'll see it all over the walls of the temples everywhere. Oh my goodness, I want to say so there's the Blue Lotus and the papyrus. And the two together, when you see the two of them together, one represents Upper Egypt and one represents Lower Egypt. And when they're together, it's showing the unification of the two lands. And Upper Egypt is like the south, right? It's the whole southern part of Egypt because its elevation is higher. And the river flows from Upper Egypt to Lower Egypt, which is in the north.
I see.
Where the delta is. So I think that I don't remember. I'll say that. One of them, the Blue Lotus is either Upper or Lower Egypt, and I should know this, but it's not in the top of my head. So anyway, that's the Blue Lotus. And then it has some psychotropic qualities to it.
Yeah, what are those?
It's very mild, kind of what my experience has been, and from what I've heard from others and others who work with it regularly in terms of ingesting it, may have other experiences, but it's more of an enhancer, right? It's not that it in of itself does something miraculous. It's that it, when combined with fill in the blank, it enhances that. It calms. It's not like a really active plant, but it's kind of like the plant itself, right? This, like, you think about this bloom that opens and the way it's like your eyes brighten and life feels rich and full. And
it's really beautiful.
It's kind of like that, right? We don't work with the plant internally when we're on the tours, for a whole lot of reasons. But we don't need to. We can access the spirit of the plant and receive a very similar experience journeying with it and working with its alchemy, without having to ingest it. But some people do. And you can have tea. You can get tea. There's a very important piece. There's a Blue Lotus that comes out of Indonesia, and most of the Blue Lotus that's being sold on the market these days is the Indonesian Blue Lotus. And the Egyptian Blue Lotus is a very different species, and it's the Egyptian Blue Lotus that has the more, right? More whatever. The Indonesian Blue Lotus is lovely, but they're different species. They're different flowers altogether.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
And it's difficult to get the Egyptian Blue Lotus because it didn't go extinct, but it was, it went kind of quiet for a very, 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 very long time. But
is it more recently that it's becoming into awareness, or has it been being worked with the whole time? Like,
I think that we have a particular culture, especially in the West, that is pulling, medicines from around the world to feed our spiritual hunger. Is that a good way to say that?
It makes total sense, because the culture as a whole is so sick that it's like everyone is grasping for medicines
something to
help
heal.
us heal this cultural condition that we're in.
So I think that it's come higher into the awareness of the general population because of that. But the same is true of many plant medicines.
Absolutely.
Because of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll see. We'll see what people end up doing with it. And people are growing it in limited quantities in ponds and stuff in Egypt. And it's quite lovely flower.
Yeah, it sounds really beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Oregon Country Fair.
Okay.
I've been wanting to ask you specifically. I know you help with the opening ceremony, help coordinate that. And then you also help with something called Altered Space.
Yes.
And that's spelled ALTAR.
Yes.
Altered Space.
Yes.
What is that about?
Well, the history of Altered Space is that back when for some reason, like, dates and timelines are not my thing today. So
it's all right.
Anyway, back when, before there was an Altered Space, there was an Oregon Country Fair, and there was a little area where is now Altered Space that was not really anything. It was kind of a little dark spot off the path. And it was causing some challenges for operations because it was such a little dark nook off the path. And there were just trouble was finding itself in that little dark nook, right?
Interesting. Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So Leslie Scott, who was the then general manager of the fair, which was basically the executive director, we call it an ED now. It was a general manager then, same role, same person. She approached Nikki Scully, bringing Nikki back. And because Nikki had been a part of the fair for a long time, and she asked Nikki if they could alter this area, alter ALTER, alter this area, do something to it, to change it, to make it not a little dark nook off the side of the path at night, especially, right? And so Nikki's like, well, we could put an altar there. Because the fair didn't have an altar at that time. I mean, I don't know if that's exactly what she said or thought, but, basically that was, let's put an altar there and let's call it altered space. AR, altered. And so they built the altar and they began to tend it for many years. There's a area that is I talk with my hands. I apologize if I make little bumps on the microphone.
It's all part of it.
I'm a hand talker. I can't help it. I should try and practice not talking with my hands. I don't know if I could talk then, actually.
Keep using the hands. It's okay if there's some bumps.
Okay, so there's an altar where we recognize that divinity, that people view divinity from the perspective of their life, of their culture, of all kinds of things, of their experiences, right? And that perhaps divinity is one thing, just like a diamond is a singular thing, but there are many facets of that one thing. I'm getting into my own opinions right now. However, it overlays with altered space. And so altered space is about not saying any one of those images are the divine, God, creator, Allah, whatever you want to call that. But they're all aspects of the divine. They're all archetypes, right, of the divine. And they're all archetypes of our own nature as well. And we have that divine nature within us. So there's an altar. There's a pretty strong Egyptian kind of theme going on just because of some of our strong Egyptian connection. But we try and represent as many different cultures, religions, beliefs as we can within our very small little space. So that anybody who's walking along and looks at it can find something to relate to. That's ultimately the goal. And initially there was that, and there was a craft area, and then a healing area, altered healing and altered advice, so that someone could come and do alchemical healing, which is a particular healing art. And some other kind of healing therapists would come in too. And then altered advice, the idea initially was sort of like the Lucy 5-cent advice kind of thing.
Yeah.
So come sit down, you have a question, we'll give you some advice. And so that's all continued. When I started doing opening ceremony, I asked because the first few years I was doing opening ceremony, it was all about the elements, right? We started with a water ceremony on the main stage, and then we did water, and then we did an earth ceremony, and then we did an air ceremony. And so we had these elements, right? And they had a bowl of water the first year, and I wanted to bring that and land it somewhere. So Altered Space said, sure, bring the elements back here. By the fourth year, we got to fire. And that year, I was wanting to make fire. Of course, it's fire, right? We got to make fire, not just with a lighter or a match, but we got to make fire. So I got in touch with archaeology crew and I said, who's the fire maker guy that makes fire during the fair at Ark Park? And so, they got, Jeff was his name, and he did the full, fire starting with the stick and the moss and, the old school on main stage. And then I had a torch to be able to catch that fire once the ceremony was done, or, the sage part of the ceremony was done. And before all of this, I got in contact with a dear man named Bear, who just recently passed, and I just want to honor him. And he was a metal worker, and I was thinking, hey, maybe Bear could help me make a fire cauldron for main stage. and to catch this fire that Jeff makes. And so turns out pre-fair, because, there's this whole pre-fair thing that happens building up the fair, and there's meals that the volunteers are fed, right?
Which is a really beautiful
it's
thing
a really beautiful
to witness
thing.
and be part of. Yeah.
Right. And just to see the community, right, that happens while you're waiting in the very long line for your meal.
Yeah.
And that particular day, I'm pondering this fire for the opening ceremony. How do I put fire? How do I move it through the fair? How do I get fire crew to approve moving fire through the fair? All these considerations. And I'm pull up to my spot in line, and there's Bear right there. And I'm like, oh, this is my moment. So I'm like, Bear, so I have this thing. I had an old washer drum. I'm like, can you weld some legs on it and we can make it a thing? And he's like, I'm not going to do that. He's like, that's ugly. I'm like, oh, well, I had another idea. And he's like, what's that? And I'm like, what if we made a lotus, and the center where it's like the yellow, beautiful seed pod thing, that's the fire, where the fire goes. And he's like, I could get behind that. And so he did. And he, along with many other helpers up at the art barn, welded, cut, hammered this maybe, what is that, 2.5, 3 foot wide lotus flower that sits on a lily pad, right? And so that was at main stage in the meadow. And here's Jeff. He gets the fire going. We have a song. I say some words, and the fire sparks. I catch the fire with the torch and walk it down, and we light the fire. We then carry that fire in this giant metal blazing thing through the event and landed at Altered Space, where now it lives. The lotus is now a permanent, it has its home there, and we've built a spot. And it's beautiful to witness people coming throughout the day and sitting with that fire and watching their process. And so many people, not everybody, some people just are need a place to sit, and that's fine. But so many people, as soon as they sits down there, they have a relationship with that fire, and something happens, right? Whether it's simply integrating what just happened on the path, a few turns down, or something in there, whatever it is, right? We're all carrying what we all carry. And just to see the fire hold it for them, it's pretty amazing.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. So.
And that's such a good example of why, in my mind, things are so interesting and unique at fair, is because everything that's being built seems to be driven by inspiration rather than just utilitarian motivations. Right.
What's the intention behind it? Right?
It's got to be inspiring and fun to the people making it. Right. It's got to be beautiful. Yeah, so it really creates a lot.
serving the community, right? When you have an event that has a lot of people on the same ground at the same time, right?
The scale of this thing is so massive.
It's
I realize
so massive.
When I'm out in the parking lots and I'm looking at just the sea of, I'm just like, there's the scale of this. It feels like almost like a Woodstock level kind of event.
Well, it kind of is.
Yeah.
And, from the bureaucracy place, I know what it takes. I was on the board for 10 years and oversaw that wholeness, all of it, right? All the moving cogs and pieces and parts and all the independent pieces that come together to create a unified whole is phenomenal at the fair, because you've got all of these crews who are all autonomous for the most part, doing their own thing. They have a budget. They have a certain number of people that they can have on that crew, and they have a function that they're told they have to perform. And then they take that missive and they do their job voluntarily, right? For free, because they love the Oregon Country Fair. And you have to be careful that you don't give too much, because it will keep consuming more and more of your time.
Absolutely.
Until you put a boundary and say, okay, yeah, no, I need
good chance to practice boundaries.
Right.
Yeah.
I think I've been on the board long enough.
Yeah.
But even still, I'm still out there, right? Giving my time.
How did you get involved with Country Fair? What was your first experience? Or your first time going?
So I was dating someone who was part of Energy Park. And so he introduced me to Energy Park, and I started going to their meetings. And then that first year was 91, I want to say. So there I am with my dates again. Timelines, like 91 maybe. I think it was 91. That sounds about right. Because that would make this year my 33rd year.
Okay.
Anyway, so I got in through construction crew, not because I can swing a hammer. I can, sort of, if I had to, but because sign painting was under construction crew back in that time, right? And it was set up in main camp, and so I was doing signs. I was painting signs, and then from there, the following year, because Energy Park has a particular protocol to become part of their crew, you have to show up at meetings and work parties and participate, right? Before they just let you on the crew. And I had started doing that even that first year when I was on construction crew. And then I was at Energy Park for years and years and years and years and years, and did lots of different things there. Staff coordinator, I did just helping, just no role, just on staff. And then maybe 15, 20, 15, 16, 17, 18, I don't know, 20 years ago, I wrote a letter to Leslie Scott, again, the then GM of the fair, saying, hey, why aren't you using organic shirts? Don't you know how much chemicals go into these non-organic shirts? And I calculated out how many shirts we were putting on our staff people and what that equated to. And she's like, okay, you've got the job. So then I went from Energy Park to inventory crew, where I wrangled staff t-shirts for 20, 15, 18, 17 years, long time.
Cool. Do you still do any signs, painting of signs?
Nope, I don't do painting of signs anymore. I stopped. I just did that 1 year.
Okay.
I painted signs in Energy Park, but that was different. And then when I moved to Energy Park, that was done. When I moved to inventory crew, I kept camping in Energy Park for a little while, but then eventually I moved out and moved to Marshall's Landing for a while. And so, yeah, now I'm just doing the opening ceremony and Altered Space.
Can you tell us anything about this year's opening ceremony, or is it secret?
Oh, no, I can tell you. So, as I was talking, there are themes. So we did the elements, right? And then from there, we went to the fifth element. And I was like, okay, well, what is the fifth element? Okay, the fifth element is, well, everybody has their own opinion about what the fifth element is. You call it Akasha, you call it ether, you call it spirit, you call it, what do you call it?
It's also a movie.
Right, it's a movie. What is the fifth? So I'm like, well, if we're all standing in a circle around the fifth element and the fifth element's in the middle, right, we're all going to see it from our perspective. So we're a circle, right? So I'm like, okay, we've gone from a square, which is the four elements, into a circle. And then I'm like, where do we go from here? So then the next year I'm like, well, this circle splits into a spiral, and that's a double helix. And so that's DNA. So that's descendants and ancestors. D, descendants. N for now, right? For you and me here now. And A for the ancestors.
Oh, beautiful.
So we honored the ancestors. We had a tree, and we tied ribbons. Everybody tied a ribbon for their family on the tree during the ceremony and throughout the fair. It was very cool to see it finished, right? This tree filled with ribbons. And then what did we do from there? Then we did some other things. Dun, 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 and we went through COVID. Dun, 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 dun. We did some online fair stuff. Dun, 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 and we did last year. Now we're here. And this year I realized that it's really, well, the Oregon Country Fair is about honoring the makers, right? It's it's a lot of things. It's a great party. But at the heart of it, it's about honoring the makers, the ones who make the craft, the food, the clothes, right? The art, the music. The stages make the event, right? Because we're making the event. The volunteers are making the event.
Right.
And so it's about honoring the makers, all the different makers, the makers who show up and make merry, right? They're making fun. They're making joy. They're making celebration, right?
Making the vibe.
They're ceremony, all of that, making the vibe, right? And so honoring the makers. And it's in our making, because of course I always want to like throw a little spin of something into it. But in a lot of the things I do, and in the classes I teach, and my work with clients, tours, all of this, ultimately it's about arriving into this moment. Here we are. And how do we make choices from here? Because every choice we make determines what's next. And collectively, we've got upwards of 8 billion people on the planet making choices right now. And then all the other creatures of the earth who are also making choices, right? It's a lot of choices being made. And so some of those choices are with really good integrity and really with good intent, and some of them not so much. And then some of them really not at all. And so I've gotten off on a little tangent here.
That's all right.
I'll pull it back. I'll find the connecting point. So how do we make choices? How do we arrive into the moment? How do we choose from here so that we are collectively weaving a beautiful world? There's my connection point. So it's through the making, right? When we make, we create. When we create, we weave the future. And what future are we weaving? Not just for our future tomorrow and next year and 5 or 10 years from now, but our future for our descendants, our future not only for the 7th generation, but, for the 25th generation. Because they're here too. They, why are we cheating them? Because of our need to have whatever our need is now, right? So 25 generations is very far away, but it's not at the same time. So honoring the makers, right? Honoring the choices that we make, weaving the future. So here's the connector point, because, I talked about the fire and the lotus, and there's a tree and the ribbons, and there's always something that's a focus for the community to do together. So it's not just them being talked at from the stage or sung to from the stage, but that they have a participatory element. And so my goal this year is to have a loom. Okay. A tapestry loom, not like one of the ones where you need the fancy petals and all that. No. Just like a frame with string. Okay. And a ball of string that's going to be the warp, right? Which is the first, you got to put the warp on. I want to pass that string around so everybody who's in the circle of the ceremony is holding it, right? And then we'll take one end of it, and while we're doing the prayer and the opening and the song and the things we do on the stage, then someone will start warping the loom. So the opening ceremony then participates in that piece of the weaving, and then we'll carry it back to altered space with the elements, because we always have the elements at the ceremony. And we take the fire, the candle that has the fire, and we light the lotus, and we'll also carry that with the loom. We'll set it up at altered space. And I've already put out a request for donations of yarn to the community. And already I'm like, oh, I've got yarn. I got yarn. I'll get you yarn. Right. So I think we'll have quite a bit of yarn.
Great.
And so then we're going to have it out through the weekend for our community to weave together.
That's so beautiful.
So that's the goal.
I'm going to make sure I'm there for the opening ceremony. That sounds really great.
Inshallah, as they say in Egypt, inshallah, it will all weave together beautifully. So fingers crossed.
It reminds me of the maypole a little bit.
Yeah.
Spin off of that.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. There's some logistical things that I'm trying to figure out, how can we best set it up so that more people can work on it at the same time, right? And so I think that, I think that I'm going to make it like a table, right? So instead of having, normally a tapestry loom would be upright like a painting on a wall, and you weave from that perspective, but then only one person can really be in front of it at a time. And this is a festival of, how many people are there on any given day? 20,000 people. But if it's a table, then there could be like 4 people standing around it, all working on it. So anyway, we'll see. We'll see
that
how
could
it works
go
out.
really well.
Yeah.
How do people find Altered Space when they get to the fair? What's the best way to get there?
Well, so we're on Strawberry Lane.
Strawberry Lane, okay.
Strawberry Lane. So like when you come in, it depends on where you come in. But basically, you get next to the river, the Long Tom River, which I hear is like one of the longest, shortest rivers that there is.
Okay.
Like if you stretched it out, it's super long, but it winds back and forth so much that it's really like goes a very short distance. Anyway, the Long Tom is there, and Strawberry Lane goes along the Long Tom. And if you just kind of keep right, all of a sudden you'll duck under these trees. I mean, you don't literally have to duck, you can just walk, but it feels it gets shady, and you kind of walk in, and there's Altered Space. Yeah. It's just past Shady Grove.
Shady Grove, okay.
But Shady Grove has gone to pasture. It's no longer a stage. But that, for people who know what Shady Grove is, and there's a little path that goes off to Community Village right there. So it's past that.
About how many people can be at Altered Space at any given time? Is there like a max capacity? Or does it just kind of work out where people come and go naturally?
I've never counted. I mean, so Altered Space inhabits 2 sides of the path, right? So the path, which we call the 8, right, goes through Altered Space. And on one side, we have the craft area, which will be where the weaving, the loom is. We also have a scroll where people can write prayers or blessings or wishes or that kind of thing. Yeah. So they can do that or do the loom. And we'll have the yarn there too of littles, either little in Big's hearts or little people want to make little bracelets with the yarn. I think we'll be doing that too. So that's on one side. And then on the other side is the fire and the altar and then the healing and advice area. And so how many people can be there at any given time? Well, there's a constant flow. So it just all works out. People coming and going, and it's never like, it's too full or I have a fun story. Okay, so there's a thing called the disco cart. And the disco cart goes around playing disco. And it's super fun for the people who are going around trailing with it, right?
Yeah.
They're having a blast.
Yeah.
It's not always as fun for the people who are being gone by. And this is true often of Altered Space, because Altered Space is a reverence spot. And we often have some music there, sometimes have some music there, depends on the time of the day. But it has this reverence to it. Lighthearted, fun, but still reverent, right? And in comes the disco cart. One year, somehow, every time they came by, right before they got to us, they'd turn off the music. And they'd walk through Altered Space. And right on the other side, they'd turn it on again. And I'm like, hallelujah. It was really great.
Wow.
But that was only the 1 year.
So
other years, they just walk on through. So if you're listening to this out there, disco cart people,
please turn it down just temporarily.
Just temporarily, just through that stretch.
People are trying to meditate over here. Let's not make it hard for them.
So, yeah. Some people walk through and they're oblivious, right? They're so in their world.
Yeah.
Right? In their mind and whatever experience they're having.
Yeah.
And some people, they're like all in their own experience, and they walk into that spot and all of a sudden they like look up and they look around and they get quiet and they're like, something's happening here. I don't know what it is, but they feel it. They feel the shift.
That's really
from
cool.
one spot to the other.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty special.
So neat that you get to be a part of that. And you're one of the people that helped make that possible.
Me and many others.
Yeah.
Right? Many others.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any fair traditions or like a favorite day of fair or anything like that?
I used to have some fair traditions. I haven't been enacting them in the same way. Not sure I want to speak those into a microphone. But it's fair, right? Everybody knows what fair is.
It's a lot of things.
It's a lot of things. I tend to like Sundays because they're quieter, they're gentler, but they're also a little more ragged and dusty, right? I like Fridays because Fridays are like fresh and new, and there's that like element of like, wow,
It's
we're
electric
here again.
in the air.
Yeah.
It's just so electric. Yeah.
It's special.
Yeah.
Fridays are special. I mean, for me, opening the fair with the opening ceremony has that, anticipatory thing. I'm like literally like getting us going on main stage that morning, right? So
cool.
It's like, here we go.
Yeah.
And then Sunday or Saturday is, there's a lot going on Saturday. So I think it's great to be there on Saturday, but it's good to find a little quiet, meditative nook off the side of the path.
Like Altered Space.
Like Altered Space.
Good advertisement.
That's it. and then you're good to go, right? But, there's a lot of great acts all 3 days. If music is your thing, there's amazing art and crafts like everywhere if art is your thing. And the food is just like, what flavor do you want now? What flavor do you want
So much to choose from.
Right.
And so many people you'll run into that
Right.
you might only see every year at fair, or
Right.
people that are familiar faces that you just synchronistically
That's it.
line up with,
Right.
even though it's a huge event.
Right.
You'll just see the same people. All kinds of interest. It feels like these kind of festivals are like synchronicity accelerators.
Mm-hmm.
You step into, and things happen really fast, and you have these miracles and just miraculous moments.
Does it happen to you that like the person you're looking for, you can't find them, you don't see them anywhere, and then like not necessarily the person you're avoiding, but sometimes the person you're avoiding is like around every corner. You're like, what is that? Like, why can't I find the one I'm looking for? And yet that one is like there everywhere. Like we're on the same path.
That's really funny.
That happens to me all the time.
Interesting. Yeah.
Okay. I have a synchronicity story. So after the fair, there's a lot of cleanup to do, right? And there's a lot of hardworking volunteers that stick around and help clean up this event. One of the things that has happened in the past on a Monday is 2 different groups of people at the fair have a marshmallow war. Okay. Now, this seems all fun, right? In theory, when they're just like fresh out of the bag, plump marshmallows, and you're hucking them at each other. Oh, yay. Well, then when you have all these marshmallows landed on the ground and full of dust, and some of them start melting and getting gooey, and there's like, it just becomes a whole nother thing. And I'm looking around this day at all these marshmallows on the ground. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Nobody has time to clean up marshmallows. I'm going to go get a rake and a box to get all these up off the ground. And so I go to quartermaster. So at the fair, there's a quartermaster that has all kinds of tools that people can check out to be able to do the work of putting the fair together or taking the fair apart. So I go walking up to the quartermaster, and I'm about to step up to the counter and ask for a rake. And this man, he steps in front of me, and he's like, he cuts me off, and I'm like, okay, it's not my time, right? I could have gotten annoyed because it was my turn, but I didn't. I'm like, just chill out. You're dealing with nasty marshmallows. It's all good, right? And so then he finishes his business, and right at that moment, the next person steps up, and I think they're going to cut me off, and they look at me, and I look at them, and in their hand is a rake, and they're like, I just need to return this rake. And I'm like, I just need a rake. That's all I need. And so it was, right, that synchronicity moment at fair happens all the time, where you need something and what you need just happens to walk by. Or you say, oh, it'd be really great if I had da-da-da, and then all of a sudden there is da-da-da, whatever da-da-da is. Like the magic
Things are just
is
like lining up all the time.
It's so amazing.
That's so cool.
So amazing. So yay, Oregon Country Fair.
Yeah. What would you tell someone? How would you explain Oregon Country Fair to someone that has never been and doesn't know what it is? I always find that interesting. Like, how do you explain that?
Well, so not meaning to like categorize people,
Yeah.
but there are different kinds of people. So like if I was talking to, my conservative relatives, would I say, I wouldn't say necessarily the same thing as I would to say, someone that seems part of the tribe, right?
Okay.
So there's that.
Totally.
In the first situation, I would talk about how the Oregon Country Fair is an amazing event that's been going on since the late 60s, and that it started as a fundraiser to support a local charter school, right? So a bunch of people who cared about each other and children and the earth and handcraft and good acoustic music at that time came together and put on the fair, and it was the Renaissance Fair at that point. And it grew and it grew and it grew. And those initial hardworking people continued to work hard to support this festival to the point where it was able to buy its own land. And now, 50 some years later, it's got 450 some odd acres of land that it owns as an organization. And during the 3-day of the event, which is the main fundraiser for the organization every year, there's amazing art and crafts and music and food and people being people, coming however they want to come, right? Come as you want.
Yeah, it's that feeling of acceptance and people bringing their best through what they're volunteering, what they're performing, the art they're bringing. Everyone's showing up at their best.
And just even if you're coming for the day and you're walking along the paths, just experiencing it, come as you want.
Yeah.
Right? Are you wearing a pink tutu? Are you wearing horns on your head? Are you wearing, your regular clothes? Are you wearing face paint? Come as you want to celebrate and play and honor life.
It's truly a zero judgment space. That's how it feels to me.
Yeah. Mostly.
That's the overall container. There could be people judging, I'm sure.
With my work in Egypt, I'm working in a very strong Islamic culture, and I've often wondered if I wore a full burqa at the fair, how the fair would respond to me in that way. I haven't done it yet. I don't know if I will, but it would be interesting if that no judgment would be there all the same in that situation.
There's definitely boundaries to that that can be pushed.
Right. So we'll see. I don't plan on doing that this year, but
but it is a very magical, free-willing kind of spirit that permeates the fair while it's happening. And
it really is.
Yeah, and people can really tap into that, even if they're not considered part of the tribe of hippies or whatever that is, counterculture. Yeah. Right. People can connect in and have these really transformative experiences on different levels, which is super beautiful.
Well, it gives them permission, right? To be open and curious and to experience a little bit of wonder.
Yeah.
Right? There's so much in our world today that is devoid of wonder.
Yeah.
Right? And when we wonder, like, I know that y'all can't see me sitting here behind the microphone, but when we wonder, our chest opens and our shoulders go back and we look up and out, right? And it's broad, it's expansive, right? When we're concerned and worried and focused on all the work we got to do and I got to do this, and we're planning and planning is great, like I'm a very strong planner, and all that admin work is really important to get stuff done, but all of that is contracting, right? And it's kind of like narrow focused here, and then as soon as there's something of wonder, there's that, right? That's one of the things I love about Egypt too, is that you walk into these temples and it's like that awe, that wonder is so potent and profound, and it almost knocks you over sometimes. Just the hugeness of it, the majesticness, if that's a word, of it, the mystery of it, right? And you're like that. And so people going through that experience for 14 days of just being open in wonderment for 14 days, it changes people. The fair has that same kind of that wonder, Like, wow, everywhere you look, there's something wondrous to behold.
Such a beautiful description. Thank you for sharing.
Right. So that's what I would say, I guess, maybe to anybody.
Yeah. I think it's pretty universal. You did a pretty good job of describing it there. Wow. So I'm going to be really inspired to be more in that wonder state of the openness and making sure I'm not constricting down with all the planning and all of my Capricorn leaning tendencies. I'm a triple Capricorn, so I've got a lot of that going on. But like you said, the planning, it's so crucial for making things happen in this reality and things we want and goals that we want, things we want to achieve and things. It's like we can just be meditating in the moment all the time, which is great. But if we actually want to see something happen, we might need to do some planning.
Right. Well, we can't make a weaving if we don't warp it first, right? The warp thread has to go on before you can weave anything onto it, right?
So
it's you got to plan it.
Yeah.
Right. And you need to plan. Do you put that warp on close together or far apart? What is your overall goal here? Or like when you're building a building, you have to put scaffolding up. The scaffolding is like the planning, and then the building is what happens around that.
Yeah.
Right. So we need the plan. We need the scaffolding, or painting a picture. Like I'll put a grid on the paper so that I can, keep the proportions right. And that grid is simply a guideline. But then in the moment, that's when life happens. The planning is important for the moment, but if we're so stuck on our plan, when we get to the moment and suddenly the plan changes in the moment because life, right? There needs to be the flexibility, like the plan to help guide us, and then the flexibility to meet whatever happens, right?
Yeah, being able to adapt in the moment,
right? Because anything could happen.
Yeah, anything could.
Anything could happen.
Yeah.
And my goodness, we are so blessed here in the Pacific Northwest and in so many places in the world. And right now there are so many who are struggling
absolutely
in huge, giant ways, right?
Yeah.
That I can't fathom.
Yeah.
I can sort of imagine, but I really can't.
Yeah.
Right? I really just can't.
Everybody's having such different experiences all the time.
So I fast with Ramadan. This was my 7th year that just finished of fasting for the month. And because it's a beautiful practice of abstaining, right, of food and water for
letting go of that attachment
just to let go,
pleasure through food.
To let go, right.
Yeah.
And it's other things too. It's not just about food and drink. It's about abstaining from habitual things that aren't maybe in our best interest, behaviors, addictions.
So great reset, clearing.
It's very much a reset.
Yeah.
And this year was very different for me because I kept, I would start getting hungry about 3 or 4, and my stomach would start growling. And every single day that happened, which was every single day of the fast, I was just thinking about all the people who are forced to fast right now, that they don't have a choice, and that some of them who are Muslim have been fasting by force for much longer than a single month of Ramadan. So I don't want to end us on any kind of bummer note, but it's important, I think, right, to be really aware of what we've got when we've got it. And it doesn't have to be great riches. We don't have to be super rich to be aware of what we've got and to be grateful for it.
Yeah, I reached this point in my life in the past few years where I just stopped complaining. Like I used to complain a lot actually about different situations and being lack of patience that I had with how my life was unfolding. But I've gotten to the point where I am so grateful for what I do have and what I have access to and what my life looks like, that I don't have things to complain about anymore. I've stopped complaining.
I love that.
It's really great.
Was there something you did to was it like cold turkey, drop in complaining, or was there something you did to help yourself move past?
I'm trying to think. I think it was just kind of a gradual process through life showing me things, and just, it was gradual. It wasn't like a single thing that I did. But now that I'm not complaining, I feel so much happier.
So much happier.
Because it's easy to find things to complain about.
Right? There's all sorts of
There's
things.
all sorts of things.
Right. But there's equally as many or more things to be grateful about.
And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just staying with those things. And
even if it's just as basic as, okay, I have a breath, right?
fresh air to breathe.
That's it.
Fresh water to drink.
That's it.
Those are really simple ones.
Yep. That's it. I love that. All right. So I'm challenging all you who hear this.
Me as well. I'm challenging you too.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say challenging you to take up Sean's practice of no complaints. No complaints.
Something I've also done talking about practices is the earthing practice of going out. It's just as simple as I go down to the bottom of the stairs there and I put my bare feet on the grass while I drink my coffee in the morning.
Oh,
and then I have a tea at night and I do the same thing. So I get about a half an hour to an hour of bare feet directly on the ground every day. And that alone has balanced me so much.
So good.
And my energy levels are better. I feel my mood is better. It's connecting to Gaia regularly and honoring that connection and then getting the benefits coming through that with just bare feet on the ground. And anyone can do it, and it's so simple.
It's so simple.
You just have to remember to do it.
Okay, so can I share a story?
Yeah.
So a bunch of years ago now, I had a gentleman come on a tour with me, amazing Australian guy who was probably more tattoos than anyone I've ever met. And he went barefoot everywhere. And I was intrigued by it, this going barefoot everywhere. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to try it. So I took off my shoes. I started going barefoot. And I went barefoot for 3 years, except for when it got under 60 degrees.
There are limits.
I could for a little while, but what it did is it made my core cold when my feet were on the cold ground.
Yeah.
I somehow couldn't keep that temperature. My temperature regulation wasn't there. And I wanted to see if anybody would stop me. So I went to the Health Center without my shoes on, went to some of the nicer restaurants in town without my shoes on. I went to openings for businesses without my shoes on. And I just really learned how to engage, right? So walking into a restaurant, you immediately engage with the person there so that they're not looking at you. They're looking at your face, at your eyes, at your interaction with them from up high, and they never get down to your feet. I also wear a lot of clothes that are long skirts or dresses. That helps. Or I'll walk in behind people, right? So that then my feet were kind of, so I got all these little things.
Yeah.
And there's twice in 3 years that I got told to get my shoes on. First time was at a glass store on the Oregon coast.
Okay.
And I was deep in the store and they realized I don't have my shoes on. And they're very worried about this because it's a glass store, right? Everything is glass. It's blown glass stuff, things of blown quality.
So they're worried there's some broken glass somewhere
and something
they don't know about.
And I'm like, I'm good. And I wanted to buy a thing. And I'm like, well, look, I can either leave and not come back in, or I can buy the thing, finish my shopping, buy the thing, and then go. And they're like, okay, you can finish the shopping. And, they were just looking out for my feet. I get it. My feet were pretty tough by that point, though. It would take quite a piece of glass to get in them. The second person was pre-fair and the Oregon Country Fair.
Oh, funny.
I'm pulling up. I park. It was early enough that I could park up close. Parking's a whole thing out there. And anyway, so I'm kind of up close. I get out of the car and I'm in a stereotype. I apologize, but there's a biker dude. I have big beer belly. He's got the leather jacket. I'm just describing him. He's got the long hair, big bushy gray beard, kind of talking like him even right now. And he'd just gotten off his bike. And I'm walking towards the front of fair, and he looks at me and he says, "Young lady, get your shoes on," just like that. And I was like, wow, of anywhere, I got told to put my shoes on at the Oregon Country Fair. And granted, there's a lot of things on the ground at the Oregon Country Fair. There's a lot of sticks. There's a lot of rocks. There's things that can hurt your feet. It's legit, just like the glass store was legit. But Anyway, I'm like, I'm good.
So funny that was from a biker too.
Biker. Right. Young lady. And I wasn't that young. Like, I was in my 40s, but I guess young is all relative, right? Young lady, get your shoes on.
That's so funny.
Like, no, sorry, not going to do it. Yeah. And then at some point, I don't know why I started wearing my shoes again, but I did. And yeah, anyway.
Well, at the end of every podcast, I like to ask 3 simple questions. The first question is, what's your favorite color?
Well, my favorite color is green, actually, like the color of
It's so lush right now with the green in spring. I love it.
Yeah. And the spectrum of greens from like the dark pines to like the green on the new growth.
Yeah.
But I don't really wear greens. I wear blues and blacks and reds.
So it's mostly like your favorite color to perceive.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Nice.
And my name is Indigo. That's a color, but I wouldn't say indigo is my favorite color.
Okay.
But I like that kind of bluish color.
Nice. What's your favorite?
What's your favorite color?
Blue.
Blue.
Yeah.
Dark blue, light blue, somewhere in between?
I like sky blue.
Sky blue.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's inspiring. It's the kind of creative kind of color. Yeah. Expansive.
Yeah.
I like that you turned it around on me and asked me if no one's done that yet. Second question is, what's your favorite number?
8. 8.
I like that you had a fast response.
Yeah, it's just always been there. 8.
Cool.
Yeah, I like that it's like a lemniscape or an infinity sign.
Yeah, that's a really cool aspect.
I think that's really important.
Yeah.
There's other things
That's a
about
cool
it.
number.
Yeah, 8.
And what's your favorite animal in this moment?
See, I don't have a fast one with this.
Pretty hard one to choose.
Right.
There's a lot of cool animals.
Well, I don't know why number I have a favorite number, but like in general in my life, I've not been like a favorites kind of person because it's situational. Like,
yeah.
Right? Like when I'm with my cat Alabaster, he's my favorite. When Mao's in my lap, it's Mao. And then when Daisy comes and shoos them all away because she's jealous, she's a favorite.
Should I rephrase the question? So it's like, what's the first animal that comes to mind in this moment?
Ooh.
Something like that. What's the first animal you think of?
Okay, so because my brain's weird, it was a zebra and a giraffe simultaneously at the same time. So they
cool.
like merged into a hybrid zebra giraffe.
Oh, cool.
I don't know what that is. Is this a giraffe? Is it a zebra gerebra? Maybe a gerebra? Yeah.
Let's go with that.
Yeah, gerebra.
Gerebra.
Yeah. That was kind of like.
I wonder if anyone will ever say that again on.
Probably not.
That's pretty unique. Yeah. Love it.
Zebra giraffe. Yeah.
I picked that up from someone else's podcast, Noah, with the Synchronicity podcast. He does that with his guests, and I thought it was really fun because it's kind of childlike, kind of fun thing, and they're such simple questions, yet sometimes they can be very hard to answer.
Right.
It's a really funny thing about it.
Okay, so your favorite number?
7.
7.
I like the way it sounds, and I also like the way it looks.
Right.
Yeah.
And when you roll the dice, you can get 7 more often than others.
Is that true?
Right, because there's 6 and 1, that's 7.
Yeah.
There's 3 and 4, that's 7. There's 5 and 2, that's 7.
Okay.
Is that all of them?
So that's the dice rolling number.
Right. Lucky number 7.
Lucky number 7. Yep.
And your animal?
Deer.
A deer.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep.
Like the kind that live around here?
Yeah. Yeah. I had a really sweet moment where I was sitting out in a chair in a backyard at a house, and this deer came up maybe within 8 feet and just laid down in front of me in this little spot.
Wow.
And I just sat there with it.
Mm-hmm.
Took a selfie too.
Right.
I had time to take a selfie. It was just, I just really like deer. I like how quiet and peaceful, and also how sensitive and tuned in they are.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to do the like super slow motions so you didn't scare it away when you
I was pretty slow. Yeah, because I was like, I wanted to stay as long as possible. This is really cool. I've never been this close to one. And it was so relaxed just laying in that little spot there.
I love that.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yay for animals.
Yay for animals. And yay for having you on the Bon Bon's Nook podcast. Zahra Indigo, thank you so much for being here. This has been a beautiful conversation.
It's been lovely to be here. Thank you, Sean.
I feel like there's all kinds of things we could talk about. So
oh, yeah. Days worth.
I would love to have you on again in the future.
Okay.
If you're up for it.
Just let me know.
Cool.
Yay. Until again, then.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Welcome.